Welcome to the Mediatwits number 175. I'm Mark Glazer, Executive Editor and Publisher of MediaShift. Today we'll be talking about Twitter having a difficult moment with its recent launch of Moments, a curated app or tab in Twitter where you can see the latest news curated. Also, Jack Dorsey back as permanent CEO at Twitter, 8% of the workforce being laid off. A lot is going on with Twitter, some of it good, some of it not so good. We'll talk about the prospects and long-term chance for Twitter to grow and take on the other social platforms on this week's episode. First, a word from our sponsor. Running your own business requires focus, and so does parenting. Mediatwits podcast sponsor NextSpace created a place where parents could give their best quality of attention to both co-working space and childcare space under one roof. Learn more at nextspace.us/nextkids. And hey, podcasting fans, do you want to start your own podcast? MediaShift has an online digital ed training to teach you the basics of podcasting. Catch it live on October 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time or watch the archive video. Go to bit.ly/startpodcast to register for that training. So before we go into our discussion, I want to introduce our panel this week. We have Alex Kantrowitz joining us from BuzzFeed, Andrew Lee from American University, Corey Hake from Washington Post, Jason Abruzes from Mashable, and Jefferson Yen, our producer in Los Angeles. So a lot's going on with Twitter lately. There's been talk about, its slow growth in users, only 300 million users, poor Twitter, but can't really compare with Facebook and its 1 billion plus users, so it's always had a little bit of an inferiority complex. Now it's released Moments, this human-curated tab of news with a lot of partners: BuzzFeed, Major League Baseball, Fox News, Washington Post, New York Times, all able to kind of curate tweets as the news breaks. Also announced that its Amplify video platform now will have pre-roll video ads that will run before videos by publishers. Another thing, partnering with a lot of different publishers. Corey, the Washington Post is now working with Twitter on Moments. Tell us what you think the power of Moments is and how you're working with them on that.
Yeah, thanks. So it rolled out last week, and I think it was a very successful launch, despite the news that followed immediately after, which seemed about the layoffs. But on the Moments front, when I was first shown the product, I was very excited, and we can all tend to be hyperbolic, I think, in the media space about things, but I felt like it was a really big shift for Twitter, somewhat at maybe paradigm level kind of shift. The way the stories unfold is very unlike Twitter, actually. It's this very visual narrative put together in a sequence by a journalist, by a user of Twitter. The goal of the product, I think, one is for excellent storytelling and the use of the medium, and the way it unfolds on mobile, I think, is quite beautiful. But I also think that strategically on Twitter's thinking about audiences that have not yet engaged. So if you look at the comparison between Facebook and Twitter and the traffic, I think there are a lot of potentials there for Twitter that are sort of left on the floor because Twitter takes a lot of work. And that was really the first thing that I noticed about it. It was just easy to use. You swipe through the photos and the visuals in this way that's just it's easy. It makes sense. You don't have to explain it. There's not a lot of people to sign up to follow. It's not complicated. The narrative makes sense. So you think about those sort of users that come to Twitter maybe by way of a link and they're not logged in, they're not registered, and they haven't done that setup cost. It can be daunting. But for something like Moments, that's easy to understand. So we thought, hey, this is a storytelling tool. It's a journalistic capability, takes advantage of the small screen. So we were really game to try it, and we think it's been fun.
Yeah, how have you used it? I mean, you've got a lot of content. How do you decide what to use in Moments, and what are you testing in there, and how's it been so far?
Well, we're still figuring out, obviously. It's been about a week. We've done quite a few, though. pretty serious in nature, actually. The first couple of days, we just published some work, the Caliphate series, with a couple of our journalists abroad. It's a pretty grim topic, but a very important one. And we were strategic. We knew that we were part of a limited publisher set that had been enabled for this at launch. And we wanted to, even with that, we wanted to differentiate what we were putting out there. Something that didn't feel perhaps as commodity-like, because Twitter, of course, has their own team that's curating their own. And so we thought that was something that would be unique that we could bring. And Twitter really sort of helped us to think about that direction as well. They've been really good partners. But there were a lot of visuals involved. There were photos from our journalists on the ground. There was some native video. The video, displays very beautifully if it's uploaded natively or on Vine. So we did some of that. We did one the other day on the Jason Rezaian reaction, actually. So some have been quite serious. We did Paris Fashion Week. That was an obvious one for us. Robin Gavin, who was actually over in Paris during Fashion Week, had some great runway shots, and it kind of made sense for us that way. So things that have been really obvious, we haven't had to dig, and we're doing about one a day.
Yeah. And Andrew, what's your take on Moments? And so far, obviously, we're only a week into it, so I guess we can't say this is the final version, and obviously will change. But what do you think so far? What's your take on it?
Well, Moments is you can see it's a little bit messy right now, depending on whether you experiment on the desktop or the mobile phone version of it. It's still very much mainstream news organizations. Whereas probably a lot of folks are trying to expect a lot out of Twitter. Maybe it's unfair to expect as much from Twitter. You're trying to get the global community of tweets and trying to put your finger on the zeitgeist of not just mainstream news, but of entertainment, of sports, and pop culture, and internet memes, and YouTube videos. It's actually a really hard task. And in fact, one of the toughest things is that you have very little signal about the users in terms of how to filter this correctly or filter it properly to make it interesting for users. So in that sense, I'm fairly sympathetic to the task that Twitter has in front of them, but I'm not sure how much they're putting in terms of resources into this. When you look at folks like Facebook and Google, they're putting hundreds and hundreds of people into machine learning to try to glean what is useful among all the chatter. I'm not sure Twitter has put that commitment into it yet. So Moments is a good first step, but you're seeing very mainstream, very conventional types of outlets being put into Moments, and I'm hoping that they're going to evolve that very quickly. Otherwise, it's just going to look like USA Today with some enhancements.
And what do you think about the bringing Jack Dorsey back? He's instituted some layoffs there, but their earnings. Everyone focuses on their growth and their lack of growth, but their earnings actually last quarter were they beat expectations and they actually did pretty well. So I mean, what do you think about the chance? I mean, of really turning this company around?
Yeah, I guess it depends on you're comparing to what. I think in its own right, Twitter is profitable. It's doing quite well in what it does. But if you compare it to other folks who are making a lot of money on these platforms, then you're starting to worry a little bit about Twitter among its peers, right? I mean, one of the toughest things about Twitter and why you see what Jack is doing with trying to pull back control into Twitter, the company, is the fact that it doesn't really have full control of its platform, right? It opened up its API for a lot of folks a long time ago, and it's trying to spin things back into its control, because otherwise it cannot control the user experience. Like if you're expecting for dozens and dozens of clients out there to jack into the Twitter feed and do what they want with it, then that makes it hard to monetize. That makes it hard to have some kind of unified user experience. So that's something that you're seeing right now, that they're trying to unify that experience for folks, and it's going to take time.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the recent issues. I mean, now that Twitter is curating news, they also, I guess, have issues with being kind of more of an editorial operation. Alex, you had a story about this Justin Bieber nude photo kind of made its way around Twitter, and Twitter couldn't decide, should we make this into a moment? How do we do that? They have guidelines around it. What are the issues now coming up for Twitter around that?
I want to be very clear. I did not advocate that Twitter put a moment of Justin Bieber naked selfie. But I do think that, and Twitter admitted that they had a discussion about whether or not to create a moment around this Bieber situation. So what's great about Twitter is when something like this happens, you have all these really weird things that get circulated around, like fun memes and jokes and It comes from all different types of organizations, from news organizations, from people. Someone put a Taco Bell, like, where his business was, Taco Bell logo, where his business was. So, and I think that stuff was great. And that was like the first image of my story. And I think that it really puts Twitter in a bit of an interesting situation, because they do rely a little bit on these celebrity users. Like, more part of the most interesting thing about Twitter is that you can always go and hear from President Obama or from Bieber or from Katy Perry. And so how would Justin Bieber then react if this platform that he's helping to feed ends up showing, a very embarrassing photo of him? And Twitter didn't have an answer. And maybe it was, the right move for them to hold off and be conservative at first. They have a long time to figure this thing out. Twitter's not going away anytime soon, and neither is Moments. So I think as time goes on, these decisions will become more familiar to them and therefore easier.
So you think it's something that over time they're going to figure out kind of guidelines and how to deal with it, but it is true that once you try to curate, there's a lot going on Twitter. It is a difficult thing to decide. What are you going to highlight? What is the most important thing? I mean, even with trends, that's been pretty imperfect, because you click on trends and usually you see a ton of spam and all kinds of weird stuff in there. So trying to bring on human curation, it makes a lot of sense, but it's a difficult task, isn't it?
Yes, I really hope that we don't know much about the people that Twitter brought on. There was a moment there where they wouldn't publish a masthead, and then the head of Moments said, well, we're not a news organization. And that's just a semantic argument that doesn't really make any sense. But I'd really love to see them talk about the people who are behind it. And I really hope they did hire great folks, because it will really come down to how well they can do as far as the curation goes. And yeah, every time they decide to make a moment about something, or feature a news organization's moment, or not feature a news organization's moment, that's an editorial decision. And they're eventually going to be judged by not the actual how the product looks or how it feels, but how well they make those choices.
Yeah, you make a good point about voice. I mean, you talk about the people behind it, and one of the great things about Twitter is the voice. And that was the thing I noticed with Moments when I first checked it out, was that it doesn't have a voice. It's just it's very much, here it is, here's a lot of stuff put together, but there isn't really kind of that personality behind it.
I don't know if it knows what it wants to be yet. I think we'll figure it out. But whenever I log in, I say, hey, is there too much stuff here? Is there too little stuff here? Is this too fast? Is this too slow? And I think it's changing. And we're still in the first couple weeks of it. So give Twitter time, and I think they're going to figure it out. But you're right. There is little voice there, and I'm sort of hoping that they're going to start to highlight more of the weird underbelly of Twitter, like when there's a trend, replace a movie title with GOAT, or replace a word in a movie title, with something else. Like, that's a great opportunity for a moment. That should be front and center, not anything, at least from my perspective. If they're trying to make the right decision for a product, they don't have a responsibility to put like the latest from President Obama on there. I want to see replace a word in a movie title with GOAT front and center.
Noted. Jason, I see you nodding your head about that too. Was that your reaction when you saw Moments, that there just wasn't enough weird stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that he got to a really good point, which is that like a lot of what makes Twitter fun, at least for its power users and the people who are really on it, is kind of the fun, weird stuff that comes out of it. Kind of the inside jokes and things like that. And I think that that's kind of like the unique content that Twitter ends up, kind of just creating by lieu of having the platform. I mean, that's really the unique stuff there. I agree that anything else they put out there is going to be pretty generic. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea, and especially if Moments is meant to try to bring in new people and users who maybe tried it once but didn't like it. Then sure, Moments can look like USA Today. It can look like just a regular newsreader, and that's fine. But I do think for if Twitter also wants this to become something that people who are on Twitter and like Twitter use, then yeah, it's going to need to do a better job of curating its own content and finding those unique fun things that bubble up.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the recent case of both Deadspin and SB Nation had their accounts temporarily suspended because they were sharing NFL highlights as GIFs, and I know that's something that people have been doing a long time with sports highlights. But I guess being commercial accounts, the NFL now has a deal with Twitter and asked Twitter to kind of pull down the highlights. Twitter, I guess, went a little further and pulled down the accounts completely. What do you think? What legal ground does the NFL have as far as sharing the GIFs? I mean, can they ask people to pull it down, and are they on pretty solid legal ground with that?
Well, one of the issues here is that the NFL doesn't need to be on solid legal ground. It just needs to have a good relationship with Twitter and a DMCA bill that's pretty wide-ranging, and they're good to go. I mean, Twitter can pull down basically anything it wants anytime, and it's definitely going to do that when A, it thinks the NFL has any sort of copyright case, which they really do here, and B, what it's now one of their partners who's saying like, hey, that's valuable content. Don't just let people blast it all over the internet. I think we also have to realize, though, that this wasn't a wide-ranging, every GIF has been pulled down, every sports highlight is off the platform. If you go to SB Nation's NFL account, there's still GIFs on there. This seemed to be a very targeted attack, and I think Twitter was kind of saying, like, hey, you guys are particularly bad offenders. We're going to, go after you, use you as a little bit of an example, and everybody else is going to kind of know the score going forward. But I do think we're going to be seeing more of this, just because there's going to be more money floating around online now. There's going to be more money going behind these highlights. We've already seen it happen in Europe with soccer highlights. I'm actually a Liverpool fan, so I like to go try to find some Liverpool highlights sometimes. It's next to impossible, because the English Premier League has done a really good job of making sure that they control those highlights, even online, even when they're just a 3-second GIF. Or
Do you think that's where we're going with this, that there is going to be much tighter kind of rein on highlights being shared around? I mean, everything starts in kind of that chaotic Wild West when it comes to the internet and comes to social platforms, but over time, as deals get made and people start to realize the value of this content, then it seems like there's going to be a little bit more restriction.
Without a doubt, and there's a really good precedent right now on this exact kind of content. I was talking to a media law professor yesterday who said that he hopes it goes to court at some point so he can get a ruling and get an idea of what is fair use with a GIF. He thinks that they're not going to win, that ESPN has to pay for its highlights, so is possibly Deadspin, possibly SB Nation going forward. It'll be interesting to see how media organizations also handle this, because the NBA, to them, they say, oh, this is free marketing. We love this. Please keep sending our highlights out there. You're helping the sport. So not everybody's in total agreement on where this is headed, but I certainly think there's going to be a much bigger gray area, a much bigger trying to figure out where the line is between leagues, the platforms, and the media organizations going forward. Yeah.
And Corey, I'm curious, as you deal with all these different platforms, social platforms, and where you're putting your content, how does Twitter stack up with Facebook, with YouTube, with all the other platforms? I mean, how do you use it versus the other platforms?
Can I say paradigm shift in 2 different answers? It's a fascinating time in the world of platforms, and as we keep calling them at the Post, distributed platforms. Maybe everyone's calling them that. For a long time, I think we knew exactly what Twitter was to us. We knew, how much referral traffic it drove compared to Facebook. We knew what Google meant to us, and I say that in terms of 2013, 2014, 2015. It continually changes. Now it sort of changes by quarter, but we sort of knew what that was, and it's a different kind of mechanism for us for engagement, for awareness, to be in the conversation. I think someone said power users earlier. When I think about Twitter and what it means to the Washington Post, I think a lot about power users of Twitter, power users of news junkie kind of thing. It's different. The referral traffic is not what we're really after, or that's not what we've really gotten historically from Twitter. I mean, we do get a significant number of people coming in that by way of Twitter, particularly on mobile, but it's not the core driver of all of our sideways traffic. I think Moments we looked at exclusively as, hey, this is a tech innovation. This is also, and particularly along the lines of mobile, but also this is a storytelling device. And so the KPIs that we had to quickly develop around it, and then we're watching because we don't exactly know yet, are really, hey, is this doing the kind of cool small screen journalism, engage users in storytelling? We think it is. And so it kind of hits that measure for us. Facebook's totally different. Instant articles, there's just not an apples to apples kind of thing. Google AMP, Apple News, they're all different. And I think that there's a bit of a conversation misnomer kind of thing happening out there a bit. I wish someone would make a glossary and try to sort it out. I think we're trying to really look at them differently, figure out what the goals are for each of them. But the idea is that we want to try them all, try them at scale, understand what they are. I just don't think you can make a good decision as a publisher unless you actually go for it. I mean, none of it is a one-way door. We can just back right out of it. Just figure out, is it useful? Are you engaging people? Are you growing your audiences? Are you doing storytelling? Does that answer your question?
Sure, it does. Andrew, do you think, like Corey said, that this is really and Twitter is offering something that's not about driving traffic, but about storytelling on its platform, meaning this distributed content idea where publishers and news organizations are really thinking about, we're putting news out there on Twitter. It's not really about getting traffic back.
Yeah, I think that's valid, though. I think the tough thing for Twitter is to try to make sense of that scattered and distributed set of tweets, right? So when you wake up in the morning, this is pretty much everyone's experience with Twitter is you pick it up and you look at Twitter in the morning and you're like, what do you do other than just scroll back and scroll and try to, in your head, make sense of what happened? It's just, it's not a pleasurable experience. And if you look at something like Facebook, they've honed the fact that they are giving you this curated feed and it's got nice display and nice summary of what's happened, and that's just really a much more superior user experience on Facebook. I think that Twitter should do is look more to see what Storyful and folks like that have been doing, right? So Storyful is the kind of the online news agency of social media, and they've tried to make sense of what goes on out there and kind of clusters them into meaningful digests of what's been going on out there. And I think what someone touched upon earlier is true. The same way that we have that saying, keep Austin weird, I think people want to keep Twitter weird. You don't want Twitter to be as manicured and as sterile as you see in other places. That's what Twitter is good at. It's kind of this raw, rough and tumble, gigantic global dialogue where you don't need permission to talk to you, but you want someone to aggregate and to make sense of that chatter. In that sense, it's a much harder task than Facebook and Google have, but Twitter's got to find some way to do that.
Right. Well, and Austin obviously is getting gentrified, and this is a sign of Twitter is going to have to be gentrified too, because it's going to need to make money.
Right.
Yeah, Corey, jump on in.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I actually think that is what Twitter's trying to do with Moments. I think that the idea there is to give an easy narrative so you can understand. Actually, I've been using it in the morning as the first thing I check, Moments, sort of an experiment, but can I get my news that way? Does it help me? And it has been. I don't have to scroll back through Twitter to figure out what's happening. There's a nice little bundle package for me. I think they're probably going pretty aggressively at that. Here's where you get your news piece instead of doing all of the work to try to figure it out within Twitter itself, which again is kind of hard. So I'm interested just from a news consumption storytelling perspective, if that's going to be a valid, is it a companion or can it be some kind of a replacement in some way? It's sort of a grown-up Snapchat story kind of thing. People keep saying that at the Post. Yeah.
Yeah. Alex, what do you think about this, like Twitter balancing its kind of business needs with Moments and now with pre-roll video coming, which basically is helping marketers, and we all assume that there will be sponsored moments, and this is really a clean place for marketers. So they're obviously pushing more for marketers, but will it help with users too?
So I think, first of all, we should establish that Twitter's business isn't actually a bad one. It's really early on, and they set expectations so high in their IPO that when you look at their revenue right now and where they need to get to, it seems so daunting, and they might not reach it. But I don't think they're doing a bad business for what they have. So they're such a new platform, and marketers, the way marketers work is they test their spend. They take a step in, and then they feel the water, and then they take a step out, and then maybe they take a bigger step in, and they feel the water, take a step out. This takes time. So we're looking at a company that really had little revenue a few years ago and now is doing almost $2 billion a year. And, I think that folks for, the reasons of Twitter's own making are giving it a hard time. So we'll just have to wait and see, I guess, on that one. As far as moments go, moments can be a killer ad product. The biggest problem with advertising within the Twitter stream is you feel like you're interrupting a conversation. For instance, if there's a big bombing somewhere, and then Jim Beam says, hey, long day, get yourself a Jim Beam, and it's 10 a.m., that's just going to feel totally wrong. Moments, though, is not a conversation. It's more of a traditional news experience with like different curated, bits of stitched together tweets. And so if you see a moment on a bombing, but then a moment on, fun ducks that play in the pond, and then you see a moment, that's promoting Dove, and it's like got some fun gifts in there, that's going to be way more attractive to an advertiser than advertising in the main Twitter stream. So I think bottom line is Twitter's business isn't as bad as everybody says, and Moments is going to help it get even better.
Do you agree with that, Jason? I mean, are you pretty bullish on what Twitter's trying to pull off here?
I completely agree that I think Twitter gets a much worse rap than it should, and there's a variety of reasons for that, none of them that are particularly interesting. Although certainly, their new CEO seemed to be as much of a, kind of a publicity play as anything else, trying to make it seem like the company's back on track. I think Moments is as boldly a commercial play as it is a consumer play. Twitter, wants to say like this is the Twitter for everybody else, but it's also a place where they've created what's essentially, a classic channel, curated, programmed channel with, highly visual things going on. That's going to be much easier to advertise against. Ideally, people will start adopting the product, pretty quickly and in large numbers, big enough to where, pre-roll video is going to become very lucrative. And pre-roll videos, one of the most lucrative forms of online advertising. That was going to be a hard sell in the old Twitter. Within Moments, it makes a ton of sense. But I think it's important for Twitter as well because this is kind of the whole skating where the puck is going thing. This is where everybody's headed. Facebook's working on their own video hub, and that's going to be their big entry into video advertising. As somebody referenced earlier, Snapchat has Stories, which is very similar to Moments, and also, very visual and allows, advertising to kind of, look good and flow through it. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is going to be transformative for their business because I'm just not terribly confident it's going to get a massive pickup. But I think that the motivations behind it are, 100%, in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for the discussion. It was really good. I want to thank our panel, Alex Kantrowitz from BuzzFeed, Andrew Lee from American University, Corey Hake at The Washington Post, Jason Abruzzi at Mashable, Jefferson Yen, our producer in LA. You can find Mediatwits podcast at mediashift.org each and every week. Follow us on Twitter at the Mediatwits. Our past episodes are on SoundCloud and on YouTube. And if you enjoyed the show, feel free to review us on iTunes. I want to thank our sponsor, NextSpace and NextKids. Learn more about their program at nextspace.us/NextKids. We'll catch you next week.